of numbers, of figures, of all kinds of reports, charts, and sometimes you simply don't know what to make of it. In fact, large companies, enterprises all over the world are facing with this problem, that they're facing a tremendous amount of data. Consider the amount of data that the Election Commission of India has to deal with. Billions and billions of records about people, about constituencies. What do they do with it? How do they make sense out of it? Well, as an answer to this, a lot of companies today are looking at applications in several new emerging areas. One of them is called data warehousing. There are several other areas like this. There's data mining and many other terms that you might be hearing if you're reading computer magazines. And what they try to do is try to give you tools that collect all this data and try to make sense out of it. And I have with me here Sanjeev Mehta of Microsoft, one of the companies which has a tool called SQL Server in this area. And we're going to try to see how this tool helps you make sense out of all this data that you're going to face. Hi Sanjeev, welcome to the show.
Hi.
I see you've got lots of little bits of data there. Is this data warehousing thing going to help you make some sense out of that data?
Well, yes, over the years, people have collected a lot of information in their computer systems. And this has to do with sales information, inventory information, and so on and so forth. And usually the way in which it is stored and represented gives you some aspects of the business, but not all. For example, if you were to look at this table, it stores information about sales records.
Now, this is what you would call a database?
This is part of a database. It's something called a table that stores information that's pertaining to sales. But here, I have 56,000 rows of information. And there's not really a lot I can do by way of making business decisions if I had to browse through all of it at one shot and then come up with an answer to a problem. The idea behind data warehousing is to allow people who've collected lots of information to be able to summarize it so that they can view it at different levels of summaries and then drill down on each level of summary as they choose to make better decisions. And let me just explain that to you through an application that's built using exactly this data. I can choose from right here what is the information I need. For example, unit sales. Now, unit sales was just one of those many columns that you saw there that represented all sorts of, that showed you all sorts of numbers 56,000 times. Right? And here, in one go, I have a look at the overall unit sales that I made represented both in a number as well as in a chart that appears right here.
Well, that looks a lot nicer and easier to understand. But is this something like, taking a large spreadsheet and making some simple graphs out of it so that they're easier to understand? Is this just an extension of the same idea?
Well, that's a simplistic way of looking at it, because when you look at a spreadsheet, you've probably got a lot less data. You can do a lot of these things inside a spreadsheet, but when you're faced with millions of rows of information that, that could represent sales transactions that you've had over the last 6 years, the spreadsheet just can't handle it. And when you're looking at that data by multiple dimensions, for example, if you had to look at it from a time perspective, you might have to pull that information from somewhere else. And then you start drilling down into that information. For example, here we're having a look at the sales in 1997 by quarter. And then we are having we can take a summarized look of these sales by months within quarter one, and then drill that down to days within that month one, and have this chart drawn up for us. I am taking the assistance of a spreadsheet function here, but I'm taking the data out of a much larger data store.
So this would mean that managers don't need to be confused by this tremendous amount of figures. They just need to see the relevant charts and things that make sense to them?
That's right. Different people need data of different summarization levels to make different levels of decisions. And data warehousing will help them do that, rather than have a look at the lowest level of the information.
Why is it called a warehouse? Is it because of lots of data?
But partly because it's a collection of different parts of the data that you've collected over a period of time, and partly because it's really very, very voluminous data.
How is this different from data mining, which is another term which has been coming up in the handling of data?
Data mining has to work on top of a data warehouse. It's the set of techniques that you use to access information from the data warehouse.
So is data warehousing an application for which there is a software package, just like word processing has a word processor?
But you really need to look at data warehousing as a process. You need to look at it as a combination of a process where you collect the information from all the systems that you have, put it together in the relevant format, and then be able to query it effectively. So you need a set of products with it. It's not just one product. A relational database, which is what SQL Server is an assumed product in there. You need a data warehousing server. In this case, it's part of SQL Server. You need the tools to collect the information from other databases, which is also a part of SQL Server. And then you can access that information using a Microsoft Office product like Excel.
Now, a lot of companies are going to be using this, but what about individuals? You know, very often you find that on the internet you can go out and you can ask very simple questions like, how many books can I find on this subject? And you get an answer back. Is that using tools like this, data warehousing, to actually bring you very simple answers back from this very complex data?
Yes, you could use tools and techniques like that to access information from different types of data stores. It could be from your traditional database, but it could also come from your data warehouse. Effectively, what we are saying is that we are hiding the complexities of writing computer languages or the complexities of learning how to use packages that enable you to build these kinds of reports by simply asking these questions in English. Let me just show you an example of how we've done that. Here I'm going to put a simple English question to the database, and I will say, show me category descriptions. And these category descriptions are descriptions of the products that are sold in the database that we just saw. And when I run this, it brings me the names of the categories and their descriptions right here. Otherwise, using a traditional database, I might have to type a fairly complex query like this one.
So is this something that even small companies can set up? I mean, what would something like this cost?
Well, certainly small companies can set it up. 5 users set for the traditional database, the English query, and the data warehousing component is not going to cost more than 45,000 rupees.
And are there lots of solutions like this in the market? Are there different companies which are offering solutions?
There are different companies that offer different solutions. Different people offer different components for doing these things, and the price points obviously differ.
Now, Sanjeev, I noticed what you're using here is a web browser and not really any fancy data warehousing tools. So a user doesn't really need to use those tools. He can simply use a browser or something to see this data?
Yes, that's right. In fact, the data warehouse demonstration we have here runs inside a browser. Let me just run that off for you. And what that means is that the end user who's going to view this data is impervious of where it lies and how this web page was constructed. All they need to know is where the web page is, and once they reach that web page, they can get all this information out.
Thanks, Sanjeev. So the next time you're out on the web and you ask one of these online wizards a question like, show me books on beer, what you could be getting into is a massive online data warehouse and not know it, because what you'll get back in your browser is a nice picture of maybe a chilled glass of beer and all the books on the subject. Happy surfing.